disturbing. Tonight, we are plunging into the dark heart of the Appalachian Mountains with some truly unsettling true horror stories that will keep you up all night, if you're brave enough. Smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next descent into fear. Now, get comfortable, relax. I need to tell you about what happened to me on the Appalachian Trail last October. Not because I want to, but because someone should know. Someone should have a record of it in case it happens to someone else, in case they don't make it back. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm 43 years old, retired paramedic. Spent 22 years running calls in Baltimore. Saw pretty much everything a person can see. Car accidents, overdoses, domestic violence, heart attacks in the middle of the night. You learn to compartmentalize in that job. You learn to stay calm when everyone else is losing their minds. You learn that most of the time, there's a logical explanation for everything, even when it seems impossible. I started hiking the AT in sections about 5 years ago, not for any spiritual reason or to find myself or any of that nonsense. I just needed something to do with my retirement that didn't involve sitting around feeling sorry for myself. The trail is demanding enough to keep me sharp, peaceful enough to let me decompress from 2 decades of other people's emergencies. I'd completed about 600 miles over the years, always solo, always well prepared. The section I was planning to tackle that weekend was a 40-mile stretch through North Carolina, starting near Hot Springs and ending at Max Patch. I'd hiked parts of it before, but never the whole thing in one push. My plan was to start early Saturday morning, camp Saturday night somewhere around Big Laurel Branch, and finish Sunday afternoon. Standard stuff for someone with my experience level. Friday night, I checked the weather forecast one more time. Clear skies, temperatures in the 50s, light winds, perfect hiking conditions. What the forecast didn't mention was the fog, but weather services aren't always great at predicting localized conditions in the mountains, especially thermal inversions that can create fog banks in valleys and hollows. I'd hiked in fog before. It's not ideal, but it's not dangerous if you know what you're doing. I left my motel in Hot Springs at 4:30 a.m. Saturday morning. I wanted to get an early start, maybe catch the sunrise from one of the ridges. The parking area at the trailhead was empty, which wasn't surprising. Most hikers don't start that early, especially in October when the temperatures are still dropping into the 30s at night. The first few miles were exactly what I expected. Well maintained. Trail, good visibility, steady uphill grade that got my blood moving. I made good time. Reached the first shelter just as the sun was coming up. Stopped for coffee and an energy bar. Checked my map. Made sure I was on pace. That's when I noticed the fog. It wasn't everywhere. The ridges were clear, with good views of the surrounding mountains. But down in the valleys, fog was pooling like spilled milk. Thick, white, almost solid looking. It hadn't been there when I started hiking, and it didn't match the weather forecast. But fog is fog. It happens in the mountains, especially in fall when the temperature differentials between day and night are significant. I continued hiking. The trail descended into one of those fog-filled valleys around mile 8. The temperature dropped. Immediately, not unusual, fog tends to be cooler. But this was more than I expected. Had to be at least 15 degrees colder inside the fog bank than it had been on the ridge. I could see my breath, even though it was nearly 8 a.m. and the sun was well up. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. The fog was thick, almost greasy looking. It muffled sound in a way that felt unnatural. My footsteps on the trail sounded dampened, like I was walking on carpet. Even my breathing seemed quieter than it should have been. I'd been hiking in the fog for maybe 10 minutes when I saw the figure. It was standing on the trail ahead of me, maybe 50 feet away, just at the edge of my visibility range. I could make out the basic shape, human, average height, wearing what looked like a dark jacket or coat, standing perfectly still, facing my direction. My first thought was another hiker, maybe someone who'd started even earlier than me, or someone who'd camped nearby. I called out, "Morning," the standard trail greeting. No response. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge me at all. I kept walking toward them, expecting them to respond as I got closer. But when I reached the spot where they'd been standing, no one was there. The trail was empty. No footprints in the soft earth, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I stopped and looked around. The fog was so thick I could barely see the trail markers. Maybe I'd been mistaken about the location. Maybe the figure had been further away than I thought. Or maybe they'd stepped off the trail and I just couldn't see them in the fog. I called out again. "Hello? You okay?" My voice sounded strange in the muffled air, like it was being absorbed before it could travel very far. No response, just silence. I continued hiking. 22 years as a paramedic teaches you not to jump to conclusions. People see things in fog all the time. Shadows, tree shapes, rocks that look like people from a distance. The human brain is wired to recognize human forms, even when they're not there. It's called pareidolia, and it's completely normal. But I kept thinking about how still the figure had been. People don't stand that still, especially not in the middle of a trail in thick fog. Even if someone was resting or checking their map, they'd shift their weight, adjust their pack, move their head. This figure had been motionless as a statue. About 15 minutes later, I heard the first sound. It was faint, muffled by the fog. A cry, maybe. Or a call. Hard to tell exactly what it was or where it came from. Sound behaves strangely in fog. It can bounce off moisture particles, seem to come from different directions than its actual source. I stopped and listened, but didn't hear it again. I kept hiking. The trail was well marked, even in the fog. White blazes every few hundred feet, consistent with AT standards. I was making slower progress than usual because of the limited visibility, but I was still on pace to reach my planned campsite by evening. The second time I heard the sound, it was closer, definitely human, a voice calling something I couldn't make out. It seemed to be coming from ahead of me, from the direction I was traveling. I called back. "Hello? Do you need help?" But got no response. I started thinking about possibilities. Maybe someone was lost in the fog. Maybe someone had gotten separated from their hiking group. Maybe someone was injured and calling for help. These were all reasonable explanations that required me to investigate. I picked up my pace, following the trail toward where I thought the voice was coming from. But as I walked, the fog seemed to get thicker. Visibility dropped to maybe 10 feet. I could barely see the trail under my feet. I had to stop every few steps to look for the next blaze, make sure I wasn't wandering off the path. That's when I heard footsteps. Not my footsteps, someone else's. They were behind me, matching my pace. When I walked, they walked. When I stopped, they stopped. I turned around, but couldn't see anything in the fog. Called out again, but got no response. I stood still and listened. Nothing. But as soon as I started walking again, the footsteps resumed. Same rhythm, same distance behind me, like someone was following me, staying just out of sight in the fog. This was starting to feel wrong, not dangerous, necessarily, but wrong. In 22 years of emergency medicine, I'd developed a pretty good sense for when situations were normal and when they weren't. This wasn't normal. I decided to test it. I stopped walking and stood completely still for 30 seconds. No footsteps. Then I started walking again, but changed my pace. Slower steps, irregular rhythm. The footsteps behind me adjusted immediately, matching my new pace exactly. Someone was definitely following me. Someone who didn't want to be seen or spoken to. Someone who was good enough at moving quietly that I couldn't hear them when they wanted to be silent. I started thinking about why someone might do this. Maybe they were lost and afraid to admit it. Maybe they were inexperienced hikers who felt safer following someone else. Maybe they had social anxiety and didn't want to interact. All reasonable possibilities. But the figure I'd seen earlier had been standing so still, and the voice calling in the fog had sounded strange, not like someone asking for help, more like someone just making noise. And now the footsteps, perfectly synchronized with mine, never getting closer or farther away. I reached for my phone to check if I had signal. No bars, not surprising in the mountains, especially in heavy fog. I considered my options. I could try to confront whoever was following me, but that might escalate a situation that was currently just weird. I could try to outdistance them, but that would mean hiking faster in dangerous visibility conditions. I could turn around and head back, but that would mean giving up on my planned route. I decided to keep hiking, but stay alert. If the situation got worse, I'd reassess. The fog started playing tricks on me after that. Sounds seemed to come from the wrong directions. My footsteps echoed in ways that didn't make sense, sometimes delayed, sometimes seeming to come from multiple directions at once. I'd catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look, nothing was there. I knew these were probably just effects of hiking in heavy fog. Sound distortion, optical illusions, fatigue making me hypersensitive to normal trail noises. But knowing the logical explanation didn't make it less unsettling. The worst part was how the fog seemed to move. It should have been relatively static, or moved consistently with air currents. But it seemed to shift and swirl around me in patterns that didn't match any wind I could feel. Sometimes it would thin out in front of me, giving me better visibility for a few steps. Then it would close in again, so thick I could barely see my own feet. I started having trouble finding the trail blazes. They should have been every few 100 feet, but I was going longer and longer distances without seeing them. I'd have to backtrack, search the trees on both sides of the trail, sometimes spend 5 or 10 minutes looking for the next marker. During one of these searches, I found a blaze that looked wrong. It was the right size and color, but it was facing the wrong direction. Trail blazes are positioned so that hikers can see them while walking in the correct direction. This one was facing backwards, like it was meant for someone walking the opposite way. I checked my map and compass. According to my navigation, I was still heading north, the correct direction for my planned route. But the blaze suggested I was walking south. Either my navigation was wrong, or the blaze was wrong, or I was more turned around in the fog than I thought. I decided to trust my compass and keep going north, but I made a mental note to be extra careful about navigation. Getting lost in the fog would turn a weird situation into a dangerous one. The footsteps behind me had stopped. I wasn't sure when, but I realized I hadn't heard them for a while. I stopped and listened. Nothing. Maybe whoever it was had turned back or taken a different trail. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. The silence was somehow worse than being followed. I kept hiking. The fog showed no signs of lifting. If anything, it seemed to be getting thicker. I checked my watch, 10:30 a.m. I'd been hiking in the fog for over 2 hours. Weather patterns suggested it should have started burning off by now as the sun got higher and the air warmed up. That's when I saw the figure again. This time it was closer, maybe 30 feet ahead of me, standing in the middle of the trail. Same size and shape as before, same dark clothing, same perfectly motionless posture. But now I could see more details. It was definitely a person, not a tree or rock formation. Average height, broad shoulders, wearing what looked like a heavy coat or jacket. I couldn't make out facial features in the fog, but I could tell they were facing me. I called out, "Hey, are you okay?" My voice sounded flat and lifeless in the heavy air. The figure didn't respond, didn't move at all. I started walking toward them, expecting them to acknowledge me as I got closer. But with each step, they seemed to get less distinct, like they were fading into the fog. By the time I reached the spot where they'd been standing, there was nothing there again. This time, I examined the ground carefully. The trail was soft, enough that footprints should have been visible. But there were none. No prints, no disturbed earth, no sign of human presence. Just the smooth dirt trail disappearing into the fog in both directions. I was starting to feel genuinely unsettled. One disappearing figure could be explained as a mistake or optical illusion. Two suggested something else was happening, something I didn't understand. I tried to think of rational explanations. Maybe it was the same person, someone who was very good at moving quietly in the fog, someone who was deliberately staying away from me for their own reasons. Maybe it was someone with mental health issues who wasn't responding to normal social cues. Maybe it was someone playing a prank, though that seemed unlikely given how remote this section of trail was. Or maybe I was the one with the problem. Maybe the fog and the early start and the isolation were affecting my perception. Maybe I was seeing things that weren't there. hearing things that weren't real. Hallucinations weren't uncommon in situations of stress or fatigue or sensory deprivation. But I didn't feel stressed or fatigued. I felt alert, focused, maybe a little confused but not impaired. And I'd been hiking solo for years without any perceptual problems. I decided to keep going, but document what I was experiencing. I started making mental notes of times and locations, trying to establish a pattern. If I was having some kind of breakdown, at least I'd have data to work with later. The fog was definitely behaving strangely. Instead of being uniformly thick, it was forming shapes. Columns and walls and pockets of clear air that didn't correspond to any terrain features I could identify. Sometimes I'd walk into a patch of thin fog and be able to see 50 or 60 feet in all directions. Then I'd take a few more steps and be back in soup so thick I could barely see my hands. During one of these clear patches, I saw the figure again. This time it was off to my left, maybe 40 feet away, standing among the trees. Not on the trail, not in any logical location for a hiker to be. Just standing in the forest, motionless, facing me. I stopped and stared. The clear air gave me the best view yet. Definitely human, wearing a dark coat that looked heavy, like it was made for cold weather. I still couldn't see their face clearly, but I could tell they were looking at me. I raised my hand and waved. No response. I called out, "Can you hear me? Do you need help?" But the figure remained motionless. The fog began to thicken again, closing in around me. Within 30 seconds, visibility was back to 10 feet. The figure was gone, hidden by the returning mist. I made my way over to where I'd seen them standing. It was a small clearing, maybe 20 feet across, with several large trees around the perimeter. No footprints, no disturbed vegetation, no sign that anyone had been there. But the ground was soft enough that I was leaving clear tracks as I searched. I spent 10 minutes looking for any evidence of human presence. Nothing. It was like the figure had never existed. I was beginning to understand that this wasn't a normal situation. Whatever was happening to me, it wasn't following the rules I understood. The logical explanations I'd been clinging to weren't working anymore. I checked my map again. According to my calculations, I should be approaching Lamb's Knoll, a small peak with a cleared summit that offered views in all directions. If I could get above the fog layer, I'd be able to see where I was and plan my next move. But when I reached what should have been the summit, there was no clearing. Just more trail disappearing into fog with no indication that I was at the top of anything. Either my navigation was completely wrong, or the trail was not where it was supposed to be. I pulled out my compass and took a bearing. The needle pointed north, same as it had been all morning, but something felt wrong about the direction. I'd been hiking north for hours, climbing steadily. I should have reached several landmarks by now. I should have been able to see breaks in the fog, variations in the terrain, something to confirm my position. Instead, everything looked the same. The same trail, the same fog, the same muffled silence, like I was walking on a treadmill instead of actually covering ground. I started thinking about stories I'd heard from other hikers, people who'd gotten lost in fog and walked in circles for hours, people who'd become disoriented and wandered off trail without realizing it, people who'd convinced themselves they were making progress when they were actually going nowhere. But I'd been checking my compass regularly. I'd been following the trailblazes when I could find them. I'd been paying attention to my surroundings, looking for landmarks, trying to stay oriented, unless the blazes were wrong, unless the trail was wrong, unless everything I was using for navigation was leading me somewhere other than where I thought I was going. That's when I heard the crying. It was faint at first, just at the edge of hearing. A sound like someone sobbing or moaning. Human, definitely human, but distorted by the fog. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. The sound seemed to move around me, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes to the side. I stopped and listened. The crying continued, irregular and broken, like someone in real distress. This wasn't the kind of sound you ignore. If someone was hurt or lost, I needed to help them. I called out, "Hello, where are you? I can help," and waited for a response. The crying stopped immediately. Complete silence, like someone had turned off a radio. I waited for 30 seconds, then called out again. "I'm a paramedic. If you're hurt, I can help." Still no response. But after a few seconds, the crying resumed. Same sound, same volume, coming from what seemed like the same distance, but a different direction. I tried to follow it, leaving the trail and moving into the trees. But the sound kept shifting, always staying just out of reach. Sometimes it would get closer, like I was heading in the right direction. Then it would fade away, or seem to come from behind me, or stop entirely. After 20 minutes of this, I realized I was lost. I'd been following the sound through the forest, trying to reach whoever was crying, and now I couldn't find the trail. I couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. The fog was so thick it felt like being underwater. I forced myself to stop and think. This was exactly how people died in the wilderness, by abandoning their planned route to chase something that led them astray. I needed to find the trail, get back to known navigation points, stick to my original plan. I used my compass to walk in a straight line back toward where I thought the trail should be. But after 10 minutes of walking through trees and underbrush, I still hadn't found it. I tried a different direction, then another. The fog made it impossible to maintain a straight line. I kept finding myself back at the same trees, the same rocks, like I was walking in circles. The crying started again, closer this time, much closer. It sounded like it was coming from just a few feet away, but I couldn't see anyone. The sound was clearer now. Definitely human. Definitely distressed. A woman's voice, I thought, though it was hard to tell for sure. I stood still and listened, trying to pinpoint the location. The crying seemed to move around me in a circle, staying at the same distance but changing direction. Like someone was walking around me while I stood in the center. "Where are you?" I called out. "I can't see you in the fog. Keep making noise so I can find you." The crying stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then I heard footsteps. Not the same footsteps that had been following me earlier. These were different, slower, more deliberate, and they were getting closer. I turned toward the sound, but couldn't see anything. The footsteps continued, circling me like the crying had. They were close enough that I should have been able to see whoever was making them, but there was nothing there. "Hello?" I called out again. "I know you're there. Please let me help you." The footsteps stopped. The silence stretched out, heavy and expectant. I felt like I was being watched, evaluated, judged, like something was deciding what to do with me. Then I heard my name. "Sarah." It was spoken quietly, almost whispered, but I heard it clearly. A woman's voice, definitely a woman, saying my name like she knew me, like she was trying to get my attention. I spun around looking for the source. "Who's there? How do you know my name?" No response, but after a few seconds I heard it again. "Sarah." This time it came from a different direction, same voice, same tone, but from my left instead of my right. "Where are you?" I demanded. "Show yourself." The voice came again, from behind me now. "Sarah." I was starting to panic. Not professional panic, not the controlled urgency I'd felt during medical emergencies. Real panic, the kind that makes you want to run without caring where you're going. Someone was out there in the fog. Someone who knew my name. Someone who was playing games with me. But I hadn't told anyone my name. I'd been hiking alone all morning. There was no way a stranger could know who I was, unless it wasn't a stranger. I started thinking about people I'd lost touch with, people who might have reason to follow me into the wilderness. Former colleagues, ex-boyfriends, patients' families who'd blamed me for bad outcomes. But none of that made sense. How would they know I was here? How would they have gotten ahead of me on the trail? The voice came again, closer this time. "Sarah, help me." Now it sounded pleading, desperate, like someone in real trouble. All my training kicked in. You don't ignore a call for help, no matter how strange the circumstances. I started moving toward the voice. "I'm coming," I called out. Keep talking so I can find you. But the voice had stopped. I waited, listening, but heard nothing. I continued in the direction it had come from, moving carefully through the fog. That's when I walked into the clearing. It was perfectly circular, maybe 50 feet across, with the fog forming a wall around the perimeter. Inside the circle, the air was clear. I could see the ground, the trees, even a patch of sky overhead. It was like standing inside a bubble, and in the center of the clearing, the figure was waiting for me. This time, I could see it clearly. It was a woman, middle-aged, wearing a heavy winter coat that looked decades old. Her hair was gray, pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her face was pale, almost gray, with dark circles under her eyes. She was standing perfectly still, arms at her sides, looking directly at me. But it was her expression that made my blood go cold. She looked sad. Not just sad, devastated. Like she was carrying a grief so deep it had hollowed her out from the inside. "Sarah," she said, and her voice was the same one I'd been hearing in the fog. "I've been waiting for you." I took a step back, my hand moving instinctively toward the radio on my belt. No signal up here, but the motion was automatic. "Who are you?" I asked. "How do you know my name?" She didn't answer immediately, just stood there looking at me with those hollow eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You know who I am." But I didn't. I'd never seen this woman before in my life. I would have remembered her face, that expression, the way she carried herself like she was made of grief. "I don't know you," I said, "but if you need help, I can help you. Are you lost? Are you hurt?" She shook her head slowly. "You can't help me, Sarah. No one can help me." "Why not? What's wrong?" She raised her hand and pointed at me. "You let me die." The words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered backward, my heart racing. "What?" "No, I didn't. I don't even know you." "Room 47, she said. "St. Agnes Hospital, March 15th, 2018. The date meant nothing to me. I'd worked thousands of calls over the years, transported hundreds of patients to St. Agnes. I couldn't remember every case, every patient, every outcome. "I don't remember," I said. "I'm sorry, but I don't remember you." Her face twisted with pain. "You don't remember. Of course you don't remember. I was just another call to you. Just another body to transport." I tried to think back to March 2018. I'd been working regular shifts then, still had my full partner rotation. We'd run a lot of calls that month. Flu season, plus the usual car accidents and heart attacks and overdoses. "What happened?" I asked. "What do you think I did?" "I was dying," she said. "I was dying, and I told you I was scared, and you told me everything would be fine. You lied to me." The words triggered a memory, vague at first, then sharper. A middle-aged woman, chest pain, difficulty breathing. We'd picked her up at her apartment, transported her to St. Agnes. She'd been conscious, talking, scared but stable. A routine cardiac call. "You had chest pain," I said slowly. "Heart attack symptoms. We got you to the hospital." "And then what?" she demanded. "What happened then?" I tried to remember. We'd delivered her to the ER, turned her over to the hospital staff, cleared the call. Standard procedure. I hadn't followed up on the outcome. Paramedics rarely do. We handle the emergency transport, then move on to the next call. "I don't know what happened after we left you at the hospital," I admitted. "That's not part of our job. We deliver patients to the ER, and the doctors take over." "I died," she said. 2 hours after you left me there. Massive heart attack. And you know what the last thing I remembered was? You telling me everything would be fine." I felt sick, not because of what she was saying. I'd lost patients before, and I knew that sometimes people died despite our best efforts. But because I couldn't remember her specifically, she was right. She'd been just another call to me, another scared patient among thousands. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry you died, but I did my job. I got you to the hospital as fast as I could. I gave you the best care I knew how to give." "You lied to me," she repeated. "You told me I was going to be fine when you knew I might die." That's what we're trained to do, I said. We're supposed to keep patients calm, keep them from panicking. Telling someone they might die doesn't help anyone. It would have helped me. Her voice was getting louder, more intense. If I'd known I was dying, I could have said goodbye. I could have called my daughter. I could have made peace with God. But you took that away from me. I understood now why she was here. Not just here in this clearing, but here in this fog, on this trail, in my life. She was angry. She felt like I'd failed her, like I'd stolen something important from her in her final hours. What do you want from me? I asked. I want you to know what it feels like, she said. To be scared and alone and not know if you're going to make it home. The fog around the clearing started to move, swirling inward like water circling a drain. The clear air inside the bubble began to shrink, the walls of mist closing in on us. That's what you've been doing, I said. The sounds, the footsteps, making me get lost. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to teach you, she said, what it means to be helpless, what it means to face death without knowing if anyone cares, whether you live or die. The fog was getting closer. I could feel it now, cold and damp against my back. The clearing was maybe 20 feet across now, still shrinking. This won't bring you back, I said. Hurting me won't change what happened to you. No, she agreed, but it might change what happens to the next person. The next scared patient who needs someone to tell them the truth instead of comfortable lies. I wanted to argue with her, to defend my actions, to explain that we'd done everything by the book. But standing there in that impossible clearing, face to face with someone I'd failed to save, the arguments felt hollow. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had taken something from her. Maybe telling comfortable lies was easier for me than dealing with the truth of what we were really doing, racing against death and often losing. I'm sorry, I said again. I'm sorry I failed you. I'm sorry you died, scared and alone. I'm sorry I didn't do better. She looked at me for a long moment, studying my face. The fog had stopped moving inward. The clearing held steady at about 10 feet across. Do you mean that? She asked. Yes, I said. I do. Will you remember me? Yes. Will you remember that patients aren't just calls? That they're people who are scared and need someone to see them as human beings instead of just medical problems? Yes, I said. I'll remember. She nodded slowly. Then maybe this was worth it. The fog rushed in all at once, filling the clearing like smoke. I closed my eyes and covered my face, expecting to feel her hands on me, expecting some final confrontation or revelation. But when the fog cleared, I was alone. I was standing on the trail in normal daylight, with clear visibility in all directions. The fog was gone completely, as if it had never existed. I could see the mountains around me, the sky overhead, the trail stretching away in both directions. I checked my watch. It was 2:30 p.m. I'd been in the fog for almost 6 hours, but it felt like minutes. I was exhausted, dehydrated, emotionally drained. But I was alive. I looked around for any sign of the woman, any indication that the encounter had been real. Nothing. Just the normal Appalachian forest, trees and rocks and dirt trail. No evidence of the impossible things that had happened to me. I hiked out that afternoon, made it to my car by sunset, drove back to the motel, packed my things, drove home. I didn't finish the planned route. I haven't been back to that section of trail since. I've thought about that day every day for the past 2 months. I've tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, a stress reaction, some kind of psychological break brought on by exhaustion and isolation. But I know it was real. I know she was real. I looked up the records when I got home. March 15th, 2018. Margaret Henley, age 54, transported from her apartment to St. Agnes Hospital with cardiac symptoms. Died in the ER 2 hours after arrival. Massive myocardial infarction. Survived by 1 daughter. I remember the call now. Not clearly, but enough. She'd been scared, asked me several times if she was going to die. I told her no, told her she was going to be fine, told her the doctors would take good care of her. standard reassurance. I'd meant it to be comforting, but she was right. I'd lied to her. I'd told her what I thought she wanted to hear instead of what she needed to hear. I'd made the decision that my comfort was more important than her right to know the truth about her condition. I don't know if that makes me a bad person or just a human being who made imperfect choices in difficult circumstances. I don't know if she was really there in the fog or if she was a manifestation of my own guilt and regret. I don't know if any of it actually happened or if it was my subconscious forcing me to confront something I'd been avoiding for years. What I know is this: I've changed how I think about my work. When I was active, I thought my job was to transport patients safely and efficiently from point A to point B. Keep them stable, keep them calm, deliver them to people who could provide definitive care. Now I understand that was only part of the job. The other part was seeing patients as people, recognizing their humanity, respecting their right to honesty even when honesty was uncomfortable. I can't go back and change what happened to Margaret Henley. I can't give her the goodbye she deserved or the peace she needed, but I can remember her. I can carry the lesson she taught me. I can make sure that the next time someone asks me if they're going to die, I give them an answer that honors their dignity instead of just protecting my own comfort. That's why I'm telling you this story. Not because I think you'll believe it, and not because I need sympathy or understanding, but because if you work in emergency medicine, or if you ever find yourself responsible for someone else's welfare in a moment of crisis, you need to know that your words matter. People remember what you tell them when they're scared. They remember whether you treated them like a human being or like a problem to be solved. And sometimes, if you fail them badly enough, they might find a way to make sure you remember too. I still hike, but I avoid that section of trail. I still hear Margaret's voice sometimes when the fog rolls in, calling my name, reminding me of the promise I made. I don't think she's trying to hurt me anymore. I think she's just making sure I don't forget. And I won't forget. I can't forget. Every time I see fog in the mountains, every time I hear someone crying in the distance, every time someone asks me if everything's going to be okay, I remember Margaret Henley and the lesson she taught me in that impossible clearing. Some debts can only be paid forward. Some mistakes can only be redeemed by doing better next time. Some ghosts can only be laid to rest by changing how we treat the living. That's what I'm trying to do now. That's what I'll keep trying to do for whatever time I have left. Because Margaret Henley deserved better than what I gave her, and every scared person I encounter deserves better than comfortable lies. The fog is coming in tonight. I can see it building in the valleys outside my window, and I can hear her voice, faint but clear, calling my name, reminding me